All right. Hello, everyone. I'm State Representative Leslie Harrod. I represent House District 8 in Central and Northeast Denver. It's good to see everybody. I am the first African-American LGBTQ person to hold elected office in Colorado. So everyone out there, y'all can be elected officials too. I will say that I've passed 68 pieces of legislation in the last 4 years, not just 16, but 16 this year, including 217, which is Law Enforcement Integrity and Accountability Act. Thank you. Thank you. It's always good to be here amongst friends who care so much about criminal justice reform. It's really been what I have focused my career on, not only because I know how important it is for our community and for the people that I represent here in Denver, but for people throughout Colorado, but more specifically me and my family. So for those who don't know me, my sister has been in and out of the criminal justice system for about 30 years. I have a brother who is 6'3", 300 pounds, actually is the anesthesiologist now, but has been pulled over by the police numerous times because he drives a car that is too nice in a neighborhood that is too nice for someone like him. And I have a new brother, thanks to Ancestry.com, who has faced very similar instances. And I know it's not unique to my family, but it is something that disproportionately impacts people who look like me and members of my family. And so growing up, I always knew that it was important to really think very hard if I was ever going to call the police for help, especially if my brother was there, but if anyone of color was there, because they would be mistaken as a threat and might not make it out of the situation alive. As many of us know, our parents have that conversation with us at a very young age about how to act if you get caught up with law enforcement. And you pray for a good outcome, right? But why are we teaching our 5th graders, 4th graders, 6th graders that their very skin and their very presence is considered a threat to people who are supposed to protect us, who are armed legally and in our communities? No longer can we sit aside and say that this is okay or that the current system is actually working at all. So I've been doing a lot of work on this issue, and I got to tell you, I've been able to pass a lot of reforms, specifically on criminal justice reforms, ending private prisons, defelonizing simple possession of drugs, bringing more mental health into the conversation, even if, and especially when, you're not involved in the criminal justice system at all. Because why should you have to get care because you're in the criminal justice system or by the criminal justice system? Doesn't work. But when COVID happened, you guys know this little global pandemic that we're in, and I appreciate all the masks I see out here today. I was told that we would not be able to run legislation that I was drafting specifically to address what happened to Elijah McClain in Aurora and Devon Bailey in Colorado Springs. Body cameras, fleeing felon, chokeholds, we're going to stay on the books in Colorado because we couldn't deal with that while also dealing with a global pandemic. Meanwhile, African Americans and Latinos are being disproportionately impacted and dying from COVID at alarming rates. And folks didn't want to address that head on. So I didn't have approval to move a bill forward. Period. Didn't have the support of my colleagues on either side of the aisle. It's legislative process, gotta love it. So that was just how it was gonna be. But right when we went back to session after having our COVID break, a suspended session, 3 days later, protests started happening right outside the Capitol because of what happened to George Floyd. By that Thursday, we had our first protest at the Capitol that I went to, and I was met with gunshots. 7 gunshots shot into the crowd, 1 went into the building. I was rushed aside by the state troopers and told to go on lockdown in the Capitol. Gave me some time to think. Gave my colleagues some time to worry, actually. Then I went back out in the protest, even though I wasn't supposed to, and I could hear and feel the anger in people's voices, in their hearts, in their bodies, around why are we not doing something? And by the way, it's not just about George Floyd. It's happened to me, my cousin, my brother, my friend, right here in Denver, right here in Colorado. So I immediately met with my Democratic colleagues. And they said, what can we do? We're so worried. We're so scared. Like, thank gosh you're not dead. Yeah, thank gosh. Not just today, but all days, right? And I said, you know what? I don't really need your resolutions or your tweets or your nice, kind greeting cards. I'm a legislator. You're a legislator. I want a bill. I want a bill, a comprehensive bill that will address this. And I want you all to sign on. And by the way, I'll draft it over the weekend. You'll see it when you see it. Right. To my surprise, they said, okay. And I got to work. I got to work drafting a comprehensive piece of legislation that didn't just address the fleeing felon and the chokehold, but really looked at how can we change the culture within law enforcement and hold officers truly accountable for their actions. And that's where the bill came from. So I got working. And it's really funny. I'm going to tell you guys a little backstory that folks don't know. So if you remember the protests here in Denver, you remember that they ascended onto the Capitol and they destroyed this truck, right? And it was the president of the Senate's truck. Oh my gosh, he must want those people gone. He's going to give some good media stories and good press about how awful these folks are and how we have to protect our buildings like the Capitol. So meanwhile, I'm getting interviewed about the shooting, the gunshots. He's getting interviewed about the car. And I listen to him, and he says, I understand where folks are coming from. This happens in my town in Pueblo, and we must do something to address the brutality that's happening in our community right here, right now. They forgot he's a Latino. Come on now. So I turned around, and I said, let's go talk. we got to talk. I got a bill. So we worked together to create a bill. We actually introduced it in the Senate when they weren't paying attention because they thought we were going to introduce it in the House. Great partner in Leroy Garcia, Senator Rhonda Fields, and Representative Gonzalez Gutierrez, Black and Brown Caucus members united to move this piece of legislation forward. And so the Law Enforcement Accountability and Integrity Act was born. This bill does a few things. It ends qualified immunity once and for all for law enforcement officers in Colorado, the first state to do so. What does that mean? That means a law enforcement officer can be held personally liable in their pockets for violating someone's constitutional right. Police brutality, illegal search and seizure, unwarranted no-knock raids, all included in this qualified immunity piece. No longer can they shield themselves, and they will be held personally liable up to $25,000 or 5% of the overall settlement, which typically would be in the millions. Additionally, we changed the use of force standards. No fleeing felon, no chokehold, but also if someone is not even suspected of committing a violent offense, why are you using violence against them? So we changed it from a subjective standard to an objective standard so that people can't get off and not face those criminal penalties. Elijah McClain was not even suspected of committing a crime. Should not have been in that situation in the first place. We also require body cameras for every law enforcement officer throughout Colorado by 2023. And additionally, they have to actually release that body camera footage unedited within 21 days. So don't wait for the community to forget. Release it within 21 days. 45 days if it's under investigation, not 2, 3, 4 years. You get a little bit that they want to trickle out. We also said that if there's an officer on scene and they fail to intervene, similar to what we saw with George Floyd, that they would be held to the same criminal and civil standards. At the very least, they'll get 6 months in jail, but more likely they'll be charged with that higher offense. They'll also lose their post certification. What is post? Post is the Peace Officer Standards and Training. It's their certification to have a gun and hold a badge. We take that away from them forever. So they no longer can work in the state of Colorado as a law enforcement officer ever again, not even in Greenwood Village. So on top of all of this, we've done some things that I don't understand why there has been such pushback against doing this for years, but let me tell you, racial profiling, it is a thing. It's real. And for some reason, people and states have been so resistant to passing laws to even get the data around racial profiling. Why? Probably because they know it exists. So what we're saying is they have to report all times they stop someone, every search, and even every time they point their weapon at someone, but more importantly, every time they even unholster that weapon as a form of intimidation. They have to report that. They have to report the race of the person, the gender of the person they did that to. And that goes also into a public database. Did I mention the officers who are decertified also go into a public database? So everyone can search them, not just in Colorado, but throughout the country and the world? Because they like to put us in databases. They like to put us there. They should be in there too. Then finally, we allow the AG, the Attorney General, to go in and do patterns and practice investigations. So if they see a law enforcement agency continuously does wrong, continuously allows bad actors to act on their force, continues to have policies that harm people in our communities, that they can actually go in and intervene and take over that department and rectify the situation. Sometimes you can't just allow the sheriff to make those kind of decisions, right? Or the chief. But I will tell you that I've worked with law enforcement on these issues. Chief Pazin has been someone who I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak to about these issues. He is from Denver, you know, has a different background than me, but he's from Denver. He gets it. He understands. And I think, to be honest, he hasn't said this, but I think it's hard for chiefs to remove officers because of, you all know, the union. So we take away that ability for the union to negotiate someone to come back on the force, because we're stating very clearly that if they have misconduct and excessive use of force, they will not be allowed to serve anymore. Can't just put them back on the front lines. Can't put them back in the communities where they just killed someone like they did to Devon Bailey in Colorado Springs. It just can't happen. So you can't even negotiate it. So while this bill is really comprehensive, it's not the end. There's so much more that we need to do to ensure that law enforcement is held accountable. But it is also important that we divest in law enforcement, period. So I've been working with an organization, a foundation called Caring for Denver, which if you're a Denver voter, you probably voted for it, 25 cents on a $100 sales tax increase to provide about a $35 million fund for mental health and substance use. I put that on the ballot, and I asked for Denver's voters, yes vote. They said yes at 70%. I'm now the chair of the board. It's the largest mental health foundation in the state of Colorado. We are using the money from Caring for Denver to pilot a program called STAR. STAR is based off of the model of Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon, where if you call 911, instead of getting a law enforcement officer for a mental health call or a substance use call, guess what? You can get an EMT and a mental health professional. Common sense. Common sense. But oh no, it's too expensive. Oh no, that won't work. Guess what? It works in other countries. It works in this country, and it's working in Denver. We've already started that pilot. It's been working since June, and I'm glad to say that there's already data to show that we're actually making progress and saving lives. That's what we need to do. So through this COVID response, we hear a lot of conversation about how we have to cut budgets. But what I'm asking you all to do is make sure you're holding your elected official accountable. Because if they're saying we have to cut education, we have to cut workforce development, we have to cut grants to small businesses and artists, we have to cut housing funding. If they're not cutting their public safety budget, if they're not rolling back law enforcement efforts, they're not doing their job. Because guess what? We've actually been able to close prisons through this COVID, and we realize we actually don't need to incarcerate ourselves out of everything. It's not working. But right now, we can't even do it. So, hold them accountable. If they're gonna cut funding for vital services in our community to keep us afloat, they better be doing it across the board, even in public safety, because we know that it's not actually keeping our community safe. It's not helping us to thrive, right? Just protecting budgets and protecting each other. And that's why we really have to question this thin blue line that is stepping up and saying, we don't want reform, we don't want change, we want to protect everyone on our force, regardless of what they do to our communities. can't stand anymore. And as a community, we can make that change. None of this would have happened if it weren't for the protesters, if it weren't for the many people, the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have sent letters, sent emails, even retweeted or shared something on Facebook. That got the attention of legislators across the state of Colorado, and you changed the law. You changed the law. So I want to thank you all so much for your support. I want to ask for your continued support as we continue on these efforts. And please reach out to me if you have any questions or thoughts or ideas about how we can truly reform the system for the better so that we can all thrive. I'm State Representative Leslie Herod. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you.